Have you ever wondered why a woman's capacity to heal, the very softness that nurtures life, can be the most terrifying force in a man's world? The irony lies here. The power that restores, that soothes, that gathers fragments of a broken spirit into wholeness is the same power that unsettles the masculine psyche at its deepest core. To face such power is to stand before a mirror that reveals everything he has suppressed, all the shadows he has exiled to the basement of his soul. Carl Jung understood that what is feared most is not destruction, but transformation, not the scream of chaos, but the stillness of rebirth. For a man bound to his ego, healing is not gentle. It is disarming. He senses that a woman who carries this feminine energy is not trying to dominate him through force or competition. Instead, she unsettles him by radiating a calm presence he cannot control. His defenses, carefully built over years of striving, cracking, and armoring himself against pain, are rendered meaningless in the quiet gravity of her being. It is not that she exposes him with words, but that her very existence awakens parts of himself he has spent a lifetime avoiding. In her healing presence, the unresolved grief, the silent regrets, the echoes of choices made in fear rather than love, all surge forward. What he dreads is not her judgment, but the possibility of meeting his true self through her gaze. The feminine power of healing unsettles because it interrupts the masculine illusion of self-sufficiency. A man often clings to the belief that strength is found in denial, that to ignore wounds is to overcome them. Yet, when confronted with the magnetic stillness of a woman who embodies healing, he realizes that his fortress is hollow. Jung would call this the confrontation with the anima, the feminine unconscious within him, and in this confrontation lies both terror and possibility. For to acknowledge the feminine is to relinquish the false autonomy of the ego and to enter into the paradox of dependence and union. Imagine, then, how a woman becomes both sanctuary and storm. She embodies a paradox that cannot be mastered by logic or force. To a man, her healing nature can feel like surrender demanded without negotiation. And so he resists. He may turn away, mock, or even attack what he secretly longs for, because surrendering to it requires dismantling the masks he has worn for survival. The Roman Stoics understood this fear well. Marcus Aurelius wrote that people flee from themselves into distraction, yet the true battlefield is within. To accept healing is to cease fleeing, and for a man, that is often the hardest war. For the woman who holds this power, there is a danger too. If she forgets her worth, she may give away her healing in search of validation, pouring her energy into men who take but do not transform. This is not the true essence of feminine strength, for her power does not lie in rescuing the unwilling. It lies in standing rooted, allowing her presence to awaken what is ready and refusing to be diminished by those who fear her light. Healing, in this sense, is not an endless sacrifice, but a profound alignment with truth. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, and a woman who guards her healing energy wisely embodies this individuation. She knows that her stillness is not weakness, but the silence in which truth is revealed. And so, the feminine becomes a mirror, a force, a catalyst. She awakens in man both the longing for union and the terror of exposure. His instinct is to escape, but the deeper truth is that in her presence he encounters the possibility of redemption. The fear he feels is not of her, but of the shadow she illuminates within him. In that trembling, there is both the threat of collapse and the promise of rebirth. He cannot explain why her presence lingers even when she is absent, why her silence is louder than any argument, why the memory of her eyes unsettles him in moments of solitude. This is the secret terror, not that she will abandon him, but that she has already imprinted something upon his soul that he cannot erase. Jung would call this projection, where the hidden self is cast onto another, making her appear as both the savior and the threat. What men fear most in such a woman is not that she demands too much, but that she awakens too much. She draws out the fragments of the child he once was, the unhealed wounds he carries, the grief he buried beneath years of striving, and in the recognition of this awakening, he realizes the prison was never hers to build, but his to dismantle. The feminine power of healing does not pursue him, nor does it beg for recognition. It is sovereign, self-contained, unshaken by whether he accepts or resists. This very independence terrifies him more than any plea, because it reveals that she does not require his validation. To a man who has built his worth upon conquest, to encounter a woman who does not need conquering is to stand before the unfamiliar terrain of equality. In her stillness, he feels small, not because she diminishes him, but because she refuses to feed his illusions. The Stoic philosophers knew this truth. Power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. Yet, men who have not faced their shadows cling to the opposite illusion that to dominate another is to prove their strength. When faced with a woman who will not be dominated, their fear is not of her defiance, but of their own inadequacy exposed. The paradox deepens when he realizes that the healing power he fears is the same power he craves. In moments of exhaustion, when the battles of the external world have drained his soul, he longs for the very presence that unsettles him. He yearns for the sanctuary of her embrace, for the soothing of his restless mind, for the quiet assurance that he is seen beyond the mask of achievement. Yet to receive it fully would demand vulnerability, and vulnerability requires that he lay down the armor he has mistaken for identity. The terror of being unmasked is greater than the comfort of being held, and so he resists, caught between desire and dread. For the woman, this dance is a test of boundaries. She must learn that her role is not to pull him into healing, but to remain unwavering in her own. Her energy is not a tool to fix the broken, but a presence that calls the willing to rise. This is where her empowerment begins, when she understands that healing offered to one who resists becomes a chain that binds her. Jung's path of individuation speaks of this. Wholeness is not achieved by dissolving into another, but by integrating the self. The woman who holds her healing with sacred dignity knows that she cannot carry his shadow for him. He must step into it willingly, or remain trapped in the illusions he clings to. Thus, men fear not only her healing, but also the freedom it symbolizes. To be with her means he must grow. To resist her means he remains stagnant. In this tension, the feminine becomes both the mirror and the threshold. She does not drag him across it, but she illuminates the door. If he chooses to walk through, he will find not her possession, but his own liberation. If he refuses, the fear he projected onto her will follow him, for it was never hers to hold. It was always his own. And so, the feminine power of healing remains a paradox, desired yet dreaded, sought after yet resisted. For men, it is the haunting reminder that love is not about possession, but about transformation. For women, It is the lesson that their gift is not in chasing, but in embodying the wholeness that draws others toward the light. There is an unspoken truth that ripples through the ages. Men may chase beauty, they may hunger for passion, but what unsettles them most is the serenity of a woman who has healed herself. For in her stillness there is no desperation, no plea for recognition, no echo of dependency. She is whole, and wholeness cannot be possessed. This terrifies him because his power has often been measured by conquest, and conquest cannot take root in the soil of completion. The feminine power of healing radiates like an unyielding flame. It does not burn to destroy, but it burns away the illusions he has clothed himself in. When a woman carries her healing as her crown, she stands as both a sanctuary and a challenge. She is sanctuary because her presence soothes, her gaze speaks of safety, and her energy invites rest. She is challenge because she refuses to let another remain in the chains of self-deception. Jung would remind us that every soul longs for individuation, yet few are willing to endure the fire that forges it. In her company, he cannot hide behind shallow victories, for she sees beyond them. He cannot silence his regrets with noise, for her quiet amplifies them. He cannot mask his longing with bravado, for she touches the child that trembles behind the man. And what of the woman herself? She must remember that her gift is sacred. Too often, the world has told her that her healing should be spent recklessly, that her worth is measured in sacrifice. But true empowerment is not in exhausting herself for those who will not rise. The Stoics spoke of this boundary with clarity. Seneca declared that no person heals another by drowning in their sickness. Strength lies in guiding from solid ground. The feminine power of healing is no different. It is not to bleed endlessly, but to stand firmly, a beacon rather than a rescuer. Men secretly fear this because it reveals the stark contrast between two paths, the path of growth or the path of stagnation. If he steps into her presence with openness, he must shed the armor, confront the shadow, and begin the work of transformation. If he resists, he will try to reduce her power, to call it weakness, to dismiss her silence as indifference. Yet deep within, he knows the truth, that her silence is not absence, but mastery, that her healing is not fragility, but fire. His rejection of her is a rejection of himself, a refusal to face what he sees reflected in her eyes. The healing she offers is not soft indulgence, but the stern mercy of truth. She does not speak it with cruelty, but with the calm certainty of one who has walked through her own shadows. That is why he fears it, because her healing is not a gift he can control, but an invitation he must accept with humility. Jung's concept of the shadow teaches us this. To meet the feminine is to meet the hidden half of oneself, and to integrate it is to finally become whole. Yet wholeness is costly. It demands the death of illusions, the surrender of pride, the birth of a self he has never fully known. To the woman listening, the lesson is profound. Do not dilute your healing to make it palatable. The very power that unsettles him is the power that frees you. When you remain grounded, you embody the truth that cannot be shaken by rejection or fear. Your role is not to beg him to transform, but to embody the reality that transformation is possible. If he joins you, it will be his victory. If he refuses, it will be his prison. Either way, your light is unextinguished. And so, the feminine healing that men secretly fear is the same force that humanity desperately needs. It is the silent revolution, the fire wrapped in softness, the truth carried in tenderness. It does not seek to control but to liberate. And for those who cannot face freedom, liberation feels like terror. The deeper he peers into her presence, the more he discovers that her healing is not a gentle salve alone. It is a mirror sharpened with truth. For in every act of compassion, she awakens memory. In every silence, she stirs reflection. The man who has spent years burying his wounds beneath layers of noise, ambition, or conquest suddenly finds himself stripped bare. He fears her not because she intends harm, but because she refuses to conspire in his self-deception. Jung called this the confrontation with the unconscious, and it is never comfortable. To meet the feminine power of healing is to meet the parts of himself he has long denied. And yet, paradoxically, it is this very discomfort that offers redemption. For only through the unease of exposure can a man begin to integrate what has been abandoned. The shadow cannot be dissolved by denial. It must be faced, embraced, and made part of the whole. Her energy, calm yet relentless, demands this. He stands before her, as though before an ancient temple, afraid to enter, yet unable to turn away. To cross the threshold is to abandon the shallow self and risk becoming real. To retreat is to remain imprisoned in illusions that no longer satisfy. The Stoics knew this terror well. Epictetus taught that freedom is not found in avoiding pain, but in mastering the self in the midst of it. The woman's healing presence calls him to this mastery. It whispers that his armor does not make him invulnerable, but keeps him enslaved. It shows him that the conquest of others is meaningless until he conquers his own fears, regrets, and secret griefs. And it unsettles him because it strips away the excuses that once justified his stagnation. She does not scold, nor does she plead. She simply is, and her being exposes his becoming. For the woman, the temptation is always near to believe she must soften her light so that he will not flee, to make her healing less potent so that he will not fear. But this temptation is a trap, for it diminishes the very essence of her power. Her role is not to rescue the unwilling, but to embody the possibility of wholeness. In doing so, she gives him a choice, the same choice that every soul must face, to rise into truth or to sink deeper into denial. Her empowerment rests not in forcing his transformation, but in guarding her own sacred ground. What he secretly fears, then, is not her rejection, but her independence. He fears that she does not need him in the way he has been taught to believe women should. He fears that her completeness reveals his incompleteness. He fears that her wholeness demands he confront his brokenness, and yet this fear is the doorway to his liberation. For if he can endure the trembling it causes, if he can step into the vulnerability it demands, he will find within himself the capacity for healing as well. In her presence, he is not diminished, but invited to shed what is false and embrace what is eternal. This is why her healing power is both his terror and his salvation. It is the energy of renewal disguised as risk, the promise of freedom wrapped in fear. He may resist it, fight against it, or run from it, but he will never forget it. For once a man has encountered the feminine power of healing, he carries its echo in his soul forever. It becomes the haunting reminder that true strength is not found in domination, but in integration, not in conquest, but in surrender to truth. And to the woman, let this be the reminder. Your healing is not weakness, it is not fragility, and it is not meant to be bartered for love. It is the quiet revolution, the power that turns silence into revelation and tenderness into transformation. guard it. Embody it. Do not dim it for the sake of comfort, for the very power that men secretly fear is the power that sets both you and them free. There comes a moment when the mask of control shatters, when a man can no longer outrun the truth that her healing presence reveals. He realizes that the fear he felt was never truly about her. It was about himself. Every whisper of unease, every urge to retreat, every sharp resistance was the voice of his own shadow, calling out from the depths of his unconscious. Jung taught that what we resist most fiercely often contains the seed of our transformation. The feminine power of healing, therefore, does not merely soothe, it initiates. It forces the man to reckon with the reality that growth cannot occur without pain and that freedom is impossible without surrender. Yet, surrender here does not mean defeat. It means letting go of the false armor, the rigid ego, the brittle pride that has defined him. It means opening to the possibility that strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but its embrace. In her presence, vulnerability is no longer weakness. It is doorway. He may resist because the doorway seems narrow, demanding, even humiliating. But once he steps through, he sees that the humiliation was only the death of illusion. Beyond it lies the possibility of a self no longer fragmented, but whole. The woman who embodies this healing must never forget. She is not the architect of his transformation. She is the catalyst, the mirror, the reminder that wholeness exists. Too many women, seduced by the myth of sacrifice, pour themselves empty in the hope of carrying him across the threshold. But this is not her burden to bear. Her task is to hold the light steady, to remain rooted, to protect her energy from those who would consume it without ever changing. Healing offered freely is a gift. Healing demanded as a substitute for his effort is a theft. She must discern between the two. Her empowerment comes not from rescuing, but from choosing. She chooses when to give, when to withdraw, when to stand firm. And in these choices lies her sovereignty. The world has often mistaken feminine power as passivity, yet in truth it is the fiercest of powers. The refusal to be moved by manipulation, the calm that breaks the cycle of chaos, the silence that reveals what noise conceals. Marcus Aurelius spoke of the inner citadel, the fortress of the mind that cannot be conquered by external storms. The woman who has healed becomes this citadel, and in her presence he must either rise to meet her or fall back into his own shadow. For men, the fear of such a woman is the fear of freedom. To accept her healing is to accept that life is not about domination but about integration. It is to learn that the greatest conquest is not of others, but of the self. It is to discover that the shadow once feared becomes the teacher, and that love is not about possession, but about mutual becoming. Many men will turn away because the cost feels too high. But those who stay, who endure the fire of her presence, who allow the mirror to show them their truth, will find themselves reborn. And for women, this is the culmination of empowerment. To know that your healing is not a bargaining chip, not a currency to purchase affection, but a sacred essence that transforms everything it touches. You need not chase, you need not plead, you need not dim. Your very being is the revolution. Your presence alone shifts the air, awakens the soul, unsettles the ego, and calls forth the spirit. The feminine power of healing is not a tool to be wielded, but a truth to be embodied. The woman who understands this walks differently. She no longer bends to the weight of fear, for she knows it was never hers. She no longer explains her silence, for she knows its language speaks louder than words. She no longer bargains with her worth, for she knows it cannot be diminished. She moves through the world with quiet strength, and the world shifts around her. Men may fear her, but it is a sacred fear, the kind that humbles, that awakens, that transforms.